So in this segment, I thought we'd have a little bit of fun here, and I wanted to talk about why I voted to remain in the EU back in 2016. Now, I was like a lot younger, obviously, when the referendum happened. Obviously, we all were. So I was about 20 years old. I knew very little about politics. I'd been studying it for my degree, but I knew very little about the EU. I didn't take the EU module because I didn't like the lecturer, and the module's at 9 a.m. So that was never going to happen. So I thought I'd do a little bit of video about kind of the key points around Vote Leave's arguments and why I didn't believe them or did believe any of them, and also some of the other key points that Brexiteers made at the time. So that's the kind of thing I want to discuss in this video. So yeah, let's just have a look. So trade with the EU will be trade with the EU will be tariff free and involve minimal bureaucracy. Now, they argued we would keep access to the single market and make trade deals with other countries. I did not see how this could happen. Why the EU would allow this, I had no idea. I did not know what the single market was, but for me, Germany was always the biggest player in the EU, and the UK to get a better deal than Germany did not make sense. Especially in this setup, Germany would benefit greatly because it's a manufacturing powerhouse. Also, the French were on a similar level to us. I always believed in Fergie's idea that no player is bigger than the team. I could see that where the UK was headed, it felt like we were overplaying our hand. I felt uneasy at the bold claims these people were making, and it just felt to me like it was too good to be true. At least that's how I felt at the time. It just felt off. Like Germany would have benefited much more from having quote trade deals with other countries, and also keeping access to the single market and the customs union, etc. So that just didn't make sense. Northern Ireland's border will be absolutely unchanged. That was one of the claims. With this one, I knew very little about the history of Ireland and Northern Ireland, and given how easily Brexiteers battered away these questions, it was not something I was too concerned about. I really should have been, but we'd been able to stay in the single market. Had we been able to stay in the customs union single market, it would not have really been an issue, I think. So that's one of the reasons why, because they claimed it wouldn't be an issue, but evidently I was very wrong, and so were they. The end of supremacy of EU law and the EU's Court of Justice. From what I knew, laws were passed in Westminster, so the idea that laws were made in Brussels just seems so alien to me. Like, I see you guys debate bills and policy. Why would you do that if we did not make our own laws? It didn't make sense. It would just be Kubiki theatre at that point. So that one didn't make sense, especially after I went to House of Parliament and saw all the halls and stuff like that. I was like, wow, this is the place laws are made. And you just like, if the EU are the ones making the laws, then what's the point of all this? Take back control on immigration and asylum, cut migration for tens of thousands. Most of the Vote Leave gang seem like a bunch of racist clowns, I'll be honest. Non-EU immigration versus EU immigration. I knew the UK made it harder for people to come from non-EU countries, so that was never going to fly. I also knew that the Tories made it hard for non-EU immigrants to come to the UK, so this argument made no sense. Brexiteers argued that by leaving the EU, it would be easier for non-EU immigrants to come to the UK, which actually has played out to be true, because the points-based system is a little bit fairer than the system we had done if you were a person from a non-EU country. By the time, I just saw it as if the government wanted more non-EU immigration, they could easily do it. If they wanted to change the laws around short-stay visas, they could easily do it. So this one made no sense. It did work on some people, sadly, in the Asian community, but it didn't work on me. It just didn't make sense. If they wanted to change the rules around non-EU immigration, they would have done so. Something Nigel Farage said something around he wouldn't want to live next to a Romanian person. The breaking point stuff, all of the the idea that all of Romania and Poland can move here. This one really annoyed me because of the racism they aimed at Asian people and people in the Middle East. They threw out Eastern European people, and for me, I would never want to throw another minority under the bus, because once they do that to them, I'll also be close to being next on the chopping block. It wasn't that long ago. The UK has a deep-seated amount of racism. It was not that long ago. My dad was beaten up just for being an Asian guy in a white area. When he used to go to school, he's quite young. That's something that I think still exists in this country. Not really the beatings as much, but still that kind of deep-seated racism. So for me to back these sorts of people is never going to happen on this point. Maybe that's me being selfish, but there's a reason why I've never believed in British exceptionalism, because I know how toxic that stuff is. I know how racist this country can be, and my dad's stories aren't that, I joke about him and my uncles being really old, but that wasn't that long ago in the context of the UK. Really wasn't. So this kind of racism really scared me against, people, because the same racism they throw at Eastern Europeans, they'd happily throw it back at us, happily, or at the other communities. They happily would do. That's why I was always wary about this kind of stuff, because we would never be like them. Britain will take back control of its fisheries. This one should get a kick out of some people, but I don't really eat fish, so I didn't really care about this one. My experience with fish was mainly eating Bengali fish, which was full of bones, like the scary ones. I eat a lot of fish fingers and fish cake, so I could easily do that, whilst being a member of the EU, so that fishing argument made no sense. And trust me, Bengali fish is, you guys got it easy with salmon bones and cod bones, trust me. It's a walk in the park. The £350 million a week for the NHS instead of being sent to Brussels. This one I knew if they wanted to fund the NHS, they could do. Cameron made a lot of cuts to the NHS, which were, under his watch. So this one was squarely on the Tories, especially given that many of the people who pushed this claim did not believe in the NHS. So easy one here. Also the fact that it was debunked by the BBC at the time that 350 mil figure was a lie. It was about less than half of that. That actually really went to the EU budget. So, that one was an easy lie for me to kind of see through, especially because the BBC debunked it straight away anyways. New trade deals and access to the European trading zone from Iceland to Russia. They never really explained this one that well, the idea that we could be like Norway or Switzerland. Like, they never really made the case properly, why these countries were so much better than what we had. It just made it more confusing for me, because it's like, which one should we be then? Should we be Norway? Should we be Switzerland? Etc. It just didn't make sense. Cooperating on security issues and counter-terrorism. So this one I was like, duh, why would we stop cooperating? Like, it just didn't make sense to me. Financial protection for farmers who get cash from Brussels. So for this one, obviously, I have to make it very clear, I was a lot younger than I am now, and a lot less knowledgeable than I am now. Not a high bar, I admit, but so for this one, I did not understand why farmers had subsidies, so I did not care if they kept them. If anything, this made me more likely to vote Remain, because it was like, why of all things would you keep the farmer subsidy? The Common Agricultural Policy didn't make sense. Continued participation in the EU science research schemes like Horizon. I did not know what Horizon was, so I didn't care for it, but again, if we wanted to spend more on science, why didn't we just do that? Wages would be higher, claim. If the Tories wanted to increase wages, they could do so by increasing the minimum wage, so that didn't work. The union will be stronger. I never cared about the union. I still really don't. If parts of the UK vote to leave, then let them go. Doing the opposite seems so stupid to me. I was always a big fan of self-determination. Like, if the Scots want to be independent, if the Welsh want to be independent, if even if Northern Ireland, I know it's not within the Good Friday Agreement, but if they want to be an independent nation or rejoin with Ireland, I really didn't care. If Cornwall wants independence, fine. If you think you can run it better yourself, then do it. You can't force people to stay part of a country or a union they don't want to be a part of. It just doesn't make sense. Cut VAT on energy bills to save the average household £64 a year, claim. Wow, a whole £64. They did not push this one a lot, to be fair, but wow, £64. Thanks, Nigel. Scrap VAT on sanitary products. So this is one where I thought the UK could just cut the VAT on it, just unilaterally, I guess, without the EU's permission, or just go to the EU to make the case to cut it. Like, it makes sense not to have VAT on sanitary products. So for this one, it seemed like a slam dunk. Either way, the new treaty should be ready within 2 years before the next election, which I think was May. No, it wouldn't have been May 2020. It would have been it would have been May 2020. Yeah. So I don't remember this promise, so I'm not really going to comment on it, and it doesn't make sense because the referendum was in 2016. I misread it completely. The new treaty would be ready within 2 years, so it should have been ready by 2018, but it wasn't. It was ready in 2020, ironically, and was ready in 2019, and it was implemented in 2020. Sorry, my head's gone. I misread that one completely. I don't remember this promise. So Turkey joining the EU, 76 million Turks coming to the UK now. I always had a positive view of Turkey, and I still kind of do. Erdogan's an absolute waste man, I'll be honest. But, I never had any issue with people from Turkey or people from most countries, I'll be honest. And where would all these people live? This one made no sense. They made the same claims about Poland and Romania, and it never happened. So it's a pretty clear lie. Like, our rule of, did everyone in Poland evacuate Poland and come to the UK? Did everyone in Romania evacuate Romania and come to the UK? Like, what? Like, this promise makes no sense. The claim they need us more than we need them. Like, This one I didn't care much, but I did think at the time we would get a good deal from the EU given the trade volumes. But at the same time, I probably could not define what a good deal was. So even at the time, I was not sure what to make of it because you can say, oh, we'll get a great deal from the EU. What's that mean? And at the time they would argue we'll get a free trade agreement and all this stuff, but from copious amounts of Twitter, especially trade experts on Twitter, shout out to them by the way. You realise a free trade agreement isn't actually free because you still have customs fees, and you've still got loads of other things that need to be paid for you to export goods. So train our own people. If they wanted to train people here, the government would have invested more in trade programs, made university more accessible. In the school I went to, the kids that were not that good academically were given the chance to learn a certain trade like bricklaying, but the average and smart kids, average kids like me or below average, how would they were never given a choice to go onto these programs. How would we train the next generation of trades people with that attitude? Apprenticeships paid very little, so this argument just made no sense, and these are things the government had control of. Bailing out the Eurozone claim, we didn't bail out the Eurozone, we managed to get out of it completely. That was back in 2015, so that was an obvious lie. I knew that was a lie at the time. It did not sit well with me, all the austerity and the attitude during the really big asylum seeker crisis from the in the Mediterranean, from people from North Africa. People like Mehdi Hassan blame the EU for it, but I never blamed the EU. I blamed nation states. Like with austerity, the media made it clear that Germany were pushing for the really aggressive austerity, and with the asylum seeker crisis, I couldn't understand why Europe chose to let people die and let huge amounts of people build up in Italy and Greece. For whatever reason, I blamed the nation states, not the EU, and I'm still not sure why I made that distinction at the time. And yeah, I genuinely don't know why I blamed the other EU member states as countries rather than the EU as a whole. I guess maybe because it wouldn't make sense for the EU as a whole to have taken this stance when EU members were the ones that had, some EU members were taking on essentially a lot of asylum seekers compared to the northern European states. But we see a flip now with a lot of Ukrainian refugees in Poland, and Poland really struggling with the amount of people there, even though we are treating Ukrainian refugees far better than the ones we are treating the ones from North Africa and the Middle East. No one is talking about leaving the single market. Only a madman would leave. So that was, I think, Owen Paterson who made that claim. So, in my mind, why would we leave then? From what I read at the time, this was a very key part of the EU. I did not know what it was, but if it was so important, why would we leave it? Why make this point in the first place? If it's so important, it didn't make any sense. I didn't really understand the single market at the time, but what's the point of Brexit then? What are we actually leaving? It didn't make sense to me at all. The Commission being unelected, rules by unelected bureaucrats claim. I touched on this before, but I found it crazy that so many nation states would choose to be controlled by unelected people. Why did we have all of these parliaments and MPs if the rules were made by someone far away? It did not make sense. It was probably the most outlandish claim, I'll be honest. Different models, Swiss, Norwegian, Canada, Triple Plus, a bespoke deal. Again, they never explained what this stuff really meant, so it just confused me. I think to some people it was like, oh, we have so many different options, we can choose to be the country we want to be. But for me, it was like, well, which one is it going to be then? It doesn't make any sense. We import more than we export to the EU, so they need us as a trade partner, so they have to give us a good deal. This point in my head makes sense, and when you combine with we can just import from around the world, it further made sense. The trade angle would have been the closest reason they could have swung me, but they never really said who we could use to replace all the EU imports with. Like, where would we get the food from? Like, it didn't fully make sense, that one as well. The left behind, so this was another one. This was another one I saw the government could sort out with proper funding. I knew some of the damage that austerity had done at the time. This idea that Brexit would help the left behind did not make any sense when it was the Tory government that created the left behind, or at least increased the amount of people and areas that were left behind. Some of the people who supported Brexit actively added more people to the left behind list. So, we know Rishi Sunak was one of them as well. The Lexit argument. So I did not really care for the Lexit arguments because I saw the NHS was state-owned or state-run, however you want to define it. Well, for the most part anyways. Plus, the UK did a massive bailout of the banks and even owned shares in RBS, I think it was. So I get that that's not the same as full nationalisation, but it's clear that if the UK did want to help failing industries to an extent, they could do so. This thing I still don't get with Lexit is. It just didn't make sense. That's pretty much the list. There may have been a few other things I missed off by accident, but that's a look into the mind of 20-year-old me, which is terrifying. He did not have the beard I have now, but he sure was a lot slimmer. If there's any other Brexit arguments you wanted to hear 20-year-old me's thoughts about, put it in the comments. It doesn't even make sense. God. But yeah, if you want to hear what kind of thoughts I had about certain claims, I'll kind of, as long as I heard about them at the time, I'll try and remember what I thought about them. But with the fishing thing, they made such a big deal out of it, and I was like, bro, I don't even eat fish. Like, I live in the Midlands, like far away from the ocean. Like, fair enough, there are rivers here, but like, yeah, like Pochettino Comben's first rule is don't eat fish unless you live near the ocean, and that was a wise man, the wisest of men. But anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Shouts out Pochettino Comben. Support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.